Entropy. It's the natural order of things falling apart, systems unraveling, defenses weakening, chaos creeping in. In cybersecurity, we don't fight entropy, we chase after it. I'm Dave Lewis, Global Advisory CISO at 1Password, and this is the Chasing Entropy podcast, where we peel back the layers of our digital lives to reveal the human decisions, systemic cracks, and the overlooked patterns that put everything at risk. From boardrooms to breach reports, 0 days to zero trust. Yes, I said it. We're chasing the questions that keep security leaders awake at night and the stories that don't necessarily make the headlines. No hype, no FUD, just real talk with some of the minds shaping the front lines of cybersecurity today. I would like to welcome Adrian Sanabria, principal researcher at the Defenders Initiative, to the show. Welcome. I'm so glad for the opportunity to have a chat with you.
Yeah, I'm thrilled to be here. Your sixth guest. Am I number 6?
You were actually number 5 because I had to switch you
Okay.
around with our original guest, who unfortunately was on a plane.
I feel honored.
Yes, well, and spoiler alert, that may be somebody that rhymes with Wendy.
Oh, nice. Yeah, she's on a plane a lot these days. She's going to be up at Montreal. I would love to be. I've never gotten a chance to go to NorthSec, and
Really?
then I don't know why she's going to New York City. But I was just talking to my good friend Guillaume the other day, and I have had no less than 2 attempts to get up to Montreal. Uh, Foiled over the years. One was the pandemic, so I can't be too mad about that. But would
Fair
love
enough.
to get up there at some point. And yeah, I need to have Wendy on my podcast as well.
There you go.
It's been
Like
too long.
quite literally, Montreal is, and I mean, I am biased because that's where I was born and raised, but I am an absolute fan of that city in the summertime. In the winter,
Okay.
damn.
Yeah,
Just
I've seen the
walking on the
pictures.
sidewalks. Yeah, it's crazy. It's absolutely crazy. And I remember when I was growing up there, every once in a while we'd have power outages and things like that, and they would always blame sunspots, and I always found that very interesting, which I think is part of why I got into control systems in the first place. And then I learned that that was all just a bunch of hooey, but that's another story for another day.
That was your entry point, was like ICS SCADA type stuff.
For me, no, that came later. I actually started out. My first cybersecurity job was actually in banking, and then I pivoted to a defense contractor after that.
Gotcha.
But speaking of how we got started, if your CV on LinkedIn is to be believed, you really got your start back in, what was it, CompUSA, or what was it again? What was that first
Yeah,
job?
yeah. Yeah, I mean,
Wow, that took me back.
yeah, that's not, I wouldn't consider that my first career job. Like I kind of, in my brain, it starts with the first direct deposit, starts with the first salary job, not, moving from hourly to salary. But yeah, CompUSA was one of my favorite jobs because I got to a lot of exercise, stocking shelves, pulling stuff, going back to the warehouse to look for things, but I also got to exercise my brain a lot, so people would come in and say, I want to digitize all my LPs, and I've got a whole collection, what do I need to do that? We go look at the software, we'd look at the physical hardware that you'd have to put in your computer to be able to connect the two, the cables you need. It was just it was a lot of fun. It was the thing that really ruined it for me was we were just constantly being pushed to sell these like insurance plans, these replacement plans on just ridiculous stuff like $5 technology assistance program. That's what they called it for. And we had a queue, like a certain amount of tap we had to sell every week. So $5 for a replacement plan on a mouse in case it breaks.
I still see that now with various online platforms where you go to buy something and like, oh, would you like to spend,
Yeah.
$20 to insure this for 5 years? And I'm like, it's a $7 plastic toy that my, then
Target
7-year-old
does it.
son is going to be playing with.
Yeah.
It's like, why would I insure this? I know he's going to destroy it. I'm buying this so he can destroy it.
Right.
Oh,
Exactly.
man.
Yeah.
And I
But
wonder,
yeah, that's how I got my start. I think doing internet tech support made a huge impact on me. That's what I did right after CompUSA when I was still in college.
I imagine that helped you build your personal resilience as well with all the interesting
Oh my
questions I'm
goodness.
sure you got.
I've never been closer to just losing my sanity. I would do anything to have just 2 minutes to collect myself before taking the next call. But imagine this. So you're talking to somebody over the phone, could be anybody, any age, any technical, from zero technical skills to all the technical skills, which is not necessarily a good thing. You'll find when you do tech support, you get those people who think they know everything, so they're always like 2 steps ahead of you,
Yeah.
but they're in the wrong direction, right? They know too much for their own good, and they're calling you on the thing that they need to use to see if you fix their problem. They're calling you on the phone, but they get to hang up to see if their modem connects, right? Most of the time, it's some kind of connectivity issue that you're
Yeah.
trying to walk them through. So you check all the things you can, you have them make some sensible changes to their computer, and then you hang up. And I hope they had a good day after that. You never find out. You never get that sense of helping somebody. You're like, maybe I helped somebody today. I talked to 20 people. I don't know if any of them got online after I finished talking with them. Maybe I made their problem worse. I don't know. So that was something later in my career. I realized how much closing that feedback loop was important to me.
Yeah.
Actually getting feedback on the work that I'd done, knowing I had helped somebody, knowing that the work I did mattered, was really important to me.
So I imagine back then there wasn't anything like trouble tickets where you could actually track it from cradle to grave.
Sure. I mean, everyone had an account. You would go in, you put in your notes to try and help the next person. If whatever I did for you didn't work, you'd call back up. The chances you would get me again were vanishingly small. I mean, bigger at the first place I worked at because it was a smaller crew. It was like 16 people. But
Yeah.
once I moved to doing Bell South DSL tech support,
Oh
which
yeah.
eventually became AT&T, that was a much bigger call center. Um, yeah. So, I mean, I guess in theory, I could look up the next day and see if they called back or not, but yeah, there's no time for that. I would come to work right before I had to start working. I would leave the moment I was done. I would take every second of every break that they gave me. And it was just, it was really rough because you're really racking your brain trying to put yourself in the seat of the person you're talking to. And you got to have empathy and you got to have patience in that role. Sometimes it'd be a couple, one on the phone in front of the computer, one on the phone somewhere else in the house, telling the other one what an idiot they were and that they're the ones that broke it. And so you get to hear this domestic dispute during the call when you're trying to help fix the problem.
Wow.
But yeah, it was made a big impact. I think it was useful in my career, but yeah, I could not get out of that line of work fast enough.
So do you think that had any precipitous impact on your move much later in your career into podcasting, presenting, as well as hosting your own conference? You just had B-Sides Knoxville just last week. Is that you think that was a catalytic event for you?
No, I don't think so. I think what really set all that into motion. Do you know Dave Shackelford?
Oh yes, no, Dave
So
well.
he's a big mentor of mine and was my boss. I think in 2009, he
Really?
came on to run the consulting business at this small consulting company in Knoxville, Tennessee called Sword and Shield,
Hmm.
and and yeah, he was the one that convinced me to go to DEF CON, to start a blog, to get on Twitter and get engaged with the community and get vocal and connect with other people. And he also pushed me hard to get my CISSP.
Hmm.
That's the only bit of his advice I never took. I refused to do that. And I have no regrets there. I've never had a CISSP. I've had many other certifications, but never got that one. But yeah, he's the one who pushed me to do that. And it was, yeah, I started doing community building almost right away. I did these kind of Chatham House rule Skype chats
Hmm.
in 2010 for
Really?
anybody and everybody who cared about PCI. Because it was something where I dealt with it all the way through working for Elevon, which was one of the world's largest payment processors. It belongs to US Bank, the payment processing arm of US Bank. So I dealt with PCI a lot there, and I really wanted to do pen testing. So when I went and interviewed for this consulting company, they asked me, "Would you be willing to do PCI work?" And of course, I said yes because I really wanted to pen test stuff. I really wanted to hack stuff, and and yeah, just trying to get my head around it and understand like what's it good for, what are people focusing on. Like I encourage both people dealing with PCI, doing it as a QSA, being on the receiving end, or even Josh Corman was one of the early people who joined those calls. And I think it ended up just being therapy for people who just hated dealing with PCI, and it was a lot of fun. It was very rewarding setting those up, and clearly people were getting a lot out of it. They didn't have anybody they could talk to about it, and I think we all learned a lot. But they were just these like 1 hour Skype calls that I organized and got people together on. So that was kind of the start of that, and that was not too long after going to my first DEF CON along with Shaq.
Nice. Yeah, I freely admit it's been quite a while since I last talked to Shaq, and I feel really bad about that. So, Shaq, if you're listening, I will hunt you down. I mean that in the nicest possible way. Um, so when you look at it on the pen testing side of things and how you had that interest to go down that route, and I've shared that same lineage as well. When I look at what we are dealing with today, with the targets of opportunity that are presented, and we see with shadow IT being spun up in various enterprises, and now even more current, more recently rather, would be looking at agentic AI. We see these deployments that are showing up in companies all over the place. Ostensibly to make things better, be more productive, all that sort of thing. But security doesn't seem to be factored into it. Do you think that this is going to be, a watershed moment for pen testers to be able to go after these agentic AI agents, as an example?
Oh yeah, yeah. There's going to be OAuth keys all over the place. Yeah, all kinds of auth tokens. Yeah, I've been looking into MCP quite a bit, and it's going to be a mess. It's going to be a hot mess. Like we already have that problem now, and that's just going to accelerate a lot of that. And like a lot of these MCP architectures can get very complex. I've seen very simple ones where everything happens locally, but the value of it, and the value is going to be pretty huge too. Yeah, it's going to help automate some things we weren't able to automate in the past. But every time this happens, it's like the people that write the code initially don't have this, how should I say this, the burden of knowledge that
Mhm.
many of the rest of us in the security industry have been in the industry for a while, or even people who've been in the tech industry for a while. There's going to be HTTP. There's going to be unencrypted protocols. There's going to be default passwords. There's going to be like every problem that we thought we got away from in the last decade, or maybe 2 decades ago, just shows up again. It happened with cloud, happened
Yep.
with DevOps type stuff. And it'll happen again here with agentic AI.
I remember being at a conference in Manchester years ago when DevOps was really coming to the forefront. And I remember people arguing with me that security was no longer necessary because DevOps obviated the need for security in general. And I said, okay, all right, let's see how that plays out. Obviously, it didn't play out well. But one thing I'm really pleased about is that Anthropic took the step to open source or make it an open standard for MCP, which, yes, there'll be turf toe moments where organizations make some mistakes, but I'm really glad that they did that, because being able to share that sort of information, I think that we're going to see more organizations find these issues and then hopefully share them with others so that we can learn from these lessons.
Yeah, there's always good examples out there. Anthropic is like their red teaming guide is open. You know, they've been very transparent and very focused on security. Out of all the big AI foundation model folks, Anthropic is definitely the one to look to for that kind of stuff. But but yeah, it's not going to stop anybody from, yeah. Again, it's, they're a paid service. It's all the open source that glues things together behind the scenes. Every now and then, I have an IANS call where somebody's like, "Yeah, we're not sure. We're thinking about using open source, but we have reservations." I'm like, "You're using open source everywhere. Everything you've
Yeah.
got just open source baked into it all over the place." Yeah, maybe what you mean is you're more intentionally going to use some open source, maybe in some kind of project that you're working on, but yeah, that stuff is essential, but people rarely get paid to do it. Like there are some programs out there now, so that nobody's paying them to care about security. Nothing's regulating security in open source yet. It is the thing that glues everything together behind the scenes. So that's the Anthropic can do good stuff all day long, but it's going to be this piece of open source written by some random person in some random place that will get people hacked in the end of it. And maybe even this person who writes this open source puts together a whole security guide, but people don't follow it, because it's beyond the step of the process where things become functional. And the moment things become functional, we move on. We move on to the next thing. Even security people do this.
Oh my god, yeah. Like when I think back to Heartbleed, when the maintainers for the SSL library at that time were 1.5 people. And
Yeah.
then, oh, shocker, something really bad happened. And oh, yes, every website on the internet was using this. And the thing that bothers me is it's not a fear, uncertainty, and doubt, but I see this going as something that's going to replicate again in the future. Not this specific instance, but something where we're not really paying attention and that it's going to crop up again. Because we have this really bad habit of getting ahead of our skis. And when I say that, I look at, cloud. Everybody was like, oh, cloud's going to change everything. AI is going to change everything. Yes, these are very impactful tools, but we have to have some measure that we understand that this is only going to go so far. So my question that I would ask of you is, what are some of the biggest myths that you see that in security that we're contending with that may have really skewed or buried the lead, as it were, because we're too busy chasing after our impression of what things should be?
Oh boy. How long is this? How much time do we have?
However much you need.
um, yeah, I mean, there's a lot. So look, early on in cybersecurity, we came up with best practices and we came up with standards and regulations and compliance, and a lot of it was guesswork. It was like, yeah, it seems like a good idea to have somebody change your password every now and then, right? Like that seems like a good idea. It seems like a good idea to rug pull people with phishing emails, just so that they know how to deal with a phishing email. Yeah, it seems like a good idea. And then fast forward to today, and there's several papers, scientific papers, large scale studies with tens of thousands of people over years on the actual impact that phishing testing has. And we've rolled back changing passwords as a standard. And there's a whole bunch of other best practices out there that we're still doing that really aren't getting us anywhere and aren't really protecting us. So, I mentioned before, this kind of burden of knowledge that we have. And, the nice thing today, thanks in large part to ransomware, is there's a lot of information on how not to do things and how attacks actually happen and what attackers are actually going to do. We've got great stuff like the MITRE ATT&CK framework, which on its own is great. But then we also have MITRE ATT&CK framework heat maps. We have studies on, okay, like how much of the MITRE ATT&CK framework actually gets used by attackers? And the answer to that question is like 5%, right? How many
Yeah.
vulnerabilities actually cause damage every year? Google just came out with a report. They actually track the CVEs. And
Mhm.
CVEs are not all vulnerabilities, right? Those are just vulnerabilities in third-party software. That doesn't count the vulnerabilities in your own software that you wrote in-house. Turns out less than 100 every year. From year to year, there's never more than 100 CVEs, or actually, it's more like 70 something that you need to worry about out of the
Yes.
40,000 or something like that actually receive a CVE number. So it's now that we have that data, we got to use it, right? So I think that's one of the challenges is we went from no data on how to do security right to almost too much data, and now consuming it is kind of a problem. Kind of the same thing with SIMs and stuff like that. Like we didn't have enough data from IT. Now we have all the data, and just managing the data is the hard part. But if you read things like the M Trends report and Verizon Data Breach report, it's a pretty short list of things that we need to do to stop attacks and how attacks happen. Of course, the thing we have to keep in mind here is if we get really good at stopping attacks, then attacks change, right? And they
Yep.
maybe change in a way that we're not prepared for. So every time the good guys have a win, the bad guys just simply shift to something else. And it's usually less expensive for the bad guys to shift than it is for the good guys to shift.
Oh yeah, it's a perpetual game of whack-a-mole, to be quite fair. And the problem that we have too is with the attackers, they don't necessarily need that 100. They can be doing, they don't need a 0 day when they have 1,000 day that'll work just fine. And
Mhm.
this is why ransomware is so blasted effective, is because it is be really, the security debt collector for all the things that we haven't patched or
The
haven't configured
security debt
properly.
collector. Yeah, that's good.
And it's a little bit frustrating. Now, when we look at, rolling it back earlier to about policy and things to that effect, what do you think of, like, I have a posit that a lot of the policies that we see in countries around the world are really brought forward by governments rather, because we as a security industry haven't taken the time to do what we should have done. Right, we haven't managed the narrative, we haven't put forth our own version of what we think a policy should be. So governments are telling us around the world to sit at the kids table and we've got it from here. Unfortunately, some of the stuff they cook up has sometimes a very tenuous grasp on reality. Do you think that that's a fair assessment, or what do you think we should do from managing the narrative as an industry?
Yeah, I think so some of the problem is no offense to you or vendors in general, but if your marketing budget has $1 billion, you can manage a whole lot of narrative with that.
Oh
And
yeah.
that's it's going to be a biased narrative to whatever you're selling or whatever you want your customers to do, and that kind of muddies the water a little bit. And then I think myths are kind of rampant in cybersecurity. So we were the ones. I think we kind of put ourselves in this position by crying wolf too often. Even today,
Fair.
you'll hear people talk about security as if it should be the business's top priority, and it isn't,
Not by a long
and
shot.
almost certainly shouldn't be the business's top priority. The CEO's insane ideas and where they're planning on directing the company should be much more important than cybersecurity, because the CEO has the power to just, sink the whole company overnight almost. Um, and yeah, just the myths out there. Like that's one of the reasons I started a project, Destroyed by Breach. I made a list of all the companies that had ever gone out of business due to a breach, and
Mhm.
there's less than 30 companies on this list all time. And I've got
I
more
can
that
only
I'm
think of one.
investigating that I need to look into a bit more, but they're all small.
Yeah.
Just weren't big enough to absorb it, and yeah, a lot of it in recent years, the vast majority tends to be ransomware, where they just cannot recover or don't want to put in the effort or money necessary to recover from it.
I got to admit, I can only think of one company, which is probably part of that 30, was a travel site in Europe where you could iterate through just by changing the number in the URL to everybody's plane ticket. And then
Hmm.
fundamentally, they were basically gone overnight.
That does not describe anything on my list, so I'll have to get more information
Oh,
about that from
I
you.
will hunt that down for you.
Every now and then I find one. There's a lot that people think belong in that list, but don't really. Like, you'll see a lot of cases where the company was circling the drain and they got hit with a cyber attack on the way down. But
Hmm.
cyber attack or no, like it was going to happen. It was clear it was going to happen anyway. Like there was a Lincoln University, I think was the name of it, needed something like $95 million to stay solvent, to stay open, and they only had in their last semester they had less than 100 students at the
Oh,
college,
wow.
and they paid a $50,000 ransom. $50,000 out of the 95 million they needed. Like that was it was not the ransomware event that did them in.
No, most
Um,
not. Most definitely not. Didn't help, I'm sure. But
yeah.
that's one of those interesting things is we have to focus on the right points. To your point earlier, is that when we are collecting all of this data, trying to parse it down to what makes sense, what's actually usable within the environment,
Mhm.
and like the attack traffic that you were talking about, or the different types of attacks. When 100 of them per annum are really something viable, but the attackers are going to take that and they're going to use that to focus on organizations, and a lot of times they're going after stuff that quite literally could have been protected, should have been protected, patched to current, whatever it happens to be. And unfortunately, there's a small subset of that were driven by shadow IT. And to be fair, shadow
Mhm.
IT is just nothing out of malice. It's a project that somebody spun up to get something done. But I do
Right.
worry
I've
about
done
that
it.
sort
You've
of
done it.
thing. Yeah. Oh, yeah, I've definitely done it. I've done stuff that I look back and I'm like, why did I do that? It made sense to me at the time, but I look back at it, I'm like, I would have kicked my own backside if I had known that I had done that. Anyway,
Yeah,
hindsight's
I
20.
think one of the things here is security teams just have too much to track, too much to keep track of, too much to watch, too much to be responsible for. And now it's AI, and now it's AI safety. Like we're supposed to manage bias in large language models. We keep getting more stuff. I talk to CISOs who are now responsible for fraud, who are now
Mhm.
responsible for executive protection. And it's we never solved BYOD, we never solved shadow IT. These
Nope.
problems have been around for decade and a half, 2 decades now. And yeah, it's I think one of the things here is we need more help from people outside security. There need to be more processes that make this easier on us, and we shouldn't be looked to for everything. But
True.
I think the security team is still where we come in critical is again just prioritizing this stuff, being the experts that say, no, this is how attackers actually get in, so we're going to focus on this, not these other 1 million things.
Exactly. So I have a question for you here. When we look at this and we look at all the stuff that we're talking about, the exposures, policies, focus on the correct data. What do you see as the future trends as to where things are going? And you see it in a positive light, negative light? AI can accelerate things. They can, ostensibly improve things if it's done correctly, but it could also complicate matters at speed. Where do you think we're going?
Yeah, I think AI is going to be, a couple years from now. Sure, it's something that gave us an extra 10 to 20% kick to performance, to productivity. But I think it's a huge distraction from some of the foundational work that we still need to do on the security side. To me, I get 5,000 alerts inbound to my SOC every day, and I'm going to use a large language model that takes 3 to 11 minutes to investigate each of those. Like I'm burning a lot of GPU time there. That does not make any sense to me. It makes sense to me to maybe use the LLM to figure out how to deal with one of the, because out of those 5,000 alerts, there's what, like 17 things that are happening,
Yep.
37 things, like there's repetition there. And it should be, the moment it notices a pattern, it should be building some kind of static rule that can, or SOAR process or something that can fire and run in nanoseconds, not 11 minutes on a GPU. Um, and I just don't see people doing that. It just a lot of the stuff we're building with AI doesn't scale and doesn't make sense. And we're going to hit that trough of disillusionment, and I think we're pretty close to it. We're seeing companies that are kind of fed up with their their AI projects and the failures there. And to be clear, I think it's useful technology. And I gave a talk at B-Sides San Francisco 2 years ago to this point called "Best Superhero or Worst Superhero or Best Janitor." Which one is AI? And
Oh,
or it's
right.
both of those things, right? It's the worst superhero. Like, you shouldn't overpromise and under deliver with this thing, because this will be the third time that we've done that with AI. We've already had two AI winters where you can't even mention AI without getting your project canceled or your grant funds, pulled.
Yep.
And it's starting to happen again. We're starting to get to that point where we're going to have to call generative AI something different. We're going to have to come up with a different term, because it is useful and we are going to use it for things, but some companies are going to get burned so badly with it. We're going to have to come up with a different term for it. And it's my understanding that's where the term machine learning came from. We came up with the term machine learning because you could not say AI. Saying artificial intelligence in the late 80s and the early 90s, it was so burned that you couldn't even use the term. So we had to come up with an alternate term. So I think that's where we're headed with AI. And then we're back to these fundamentals of figuring out how to do identity well, of how to manage credentials. Like, I should not in 2025 be able to move an auth key, your Slack auth key, from your machine to my machine and be logged in as you, bypassing MFA, right?
Sounds like
We
a
need to get
familiar
back to
problem
that.
from the past.
Those are the problems we need to get back to, and AI is mostly a distraction from that.
Fair point. Fair point. So one of the things that I like to end off the shows with whenever I talk to anybody is a very common thread, because I get this question a lot when I'm at various conferences and things of like, how did you get started in the industry? And I want to know how to be where you are. So what piece of advice would you give somebody starting out in the industry that they could use that you would have hugely benefited from when you started out?
Um, that I didn't do. So one of the things I did that was, in hindsight, was very stupid, is I would take jobs that I was not good at on purpose, because I just had this idea that I had to be good at all things, and that
Oh
the
yeah.
best way to get good at something is to put myself in a hot seat, and just do it. So when I was like 37, I got myself diagnosed with ADHD. And once that happened, like, a lot of things got a lot easier for me. I realized, okay, I should just stop trying to be really good at this one thing, because that's just always going to be an uphill battle for me. It's always going to take me 10 times longer to do than somebody without ADHD. And I should just focus on the stuff that I'm already good at. And I credit, I mentioned Wendy was one of my mentors. Since she was already diagnosed with ADHD, she was a huge help, because I was working. She was my boss at the time that I got
Mhm.
diagnosed, and I really landed, because I was already in a writing gig, so that's already, I don't want to say a cushy gig, but a good place to land if you're trying to figure out how to completely change all your work protocols, and
Yeah.
how you manage your work life. It was a flexible job to be able to do that in. So yeah, my advice, yeah, if you think you might be, yeah, just go ahead and take the tests and stuff like that, because there's not just one kind of ADHD. My oldest
That's true.
child also has ADHD, presents completely differently in my oldest child than it does in me. So the compensating, the things we have in our work and life that we have to do to compensate for that are very different uh, between the two of us. And yeah, find something that, it doesn't have to be like your dream job, but something that's just satisfying. Like, where's that? What's that thing that you do that's valuable, that feels good when you're done with it? And I feel like I'm in that place right now. Like I mentioned very early on when we started, or not very, it's been 30 minutes, but at the beginning of our conversation, I mentioned the fact that I didn't know whether or not that person got online after I hung up the phone
Right.
with them. And now, if you look at what I'm doing since I've been independent for about a year and a half, almost all my work is done like an hour or two at a time. Whether I'm doing a podcast, or I'm doing a webinar, or I'm doing an advisory call with IANS. These things are like an hour long, 2 hours long, and I always get feedback on whether or not I've done a good job or if there's something better that I could have done. And for me, that's really important. So I wish I knew that earlier in my career.
Fair play, fair play. And on the ADHD front, I'm in there with you. Wendy actually sent me an ADHD bingo card, and I got all the bingos.
Nice. Yeah.
Well,
Now I'm curious.
I'll have to send that one to you. Thank you so much for taking the time to be on today. This has been a fun conversation. I really appreciate that. All right. And to all our listeners, please be sure to check in next week again when we will have another episode. And I'm trying to keep this on a weekly basis. But once again, Adrian Sanabria, thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate it. And to the listeners, thanks again for tuning in. Like and subscribe and all those fun things.
Thanks for inviting me.